The smell had been festering for weeks before anyone called the police. The IT started as a faint nuisance in late August, a vague sourness that lingered in the second-floor hallway of the weathered Los Angeles apartment building that Mrs. Henderson, who lived in 207, first noticed it when bringing in her groceries. A cloying, organic stench that made her wrinkle her nose and quicken her pace up by September. The odor had thickened into something palpable, something that clung to clothes and hair long after passing. The door of Unit 213, the other tenants began complaining to the building superintendent, an indifferent man named Carl who waved them off with promises to check the vents. But the smell only grew worse by October. It had become unbearable. The hallway outside 213 took on a sickly sweet putrescence, the kind that spoke of meat left too long in the sun. The neighbors stopped using the elevator rather than endure those few seconds passing the afflicted floor. Mrs. Ramirez in 211 started sleeping at her sister's house, unable to tolerate the way the stench seeped under her door at night. Still, Carl hesitated. The tenant in 213 was quiet, paid rent on time, and had lived there nearly 5 years without incident. Then the flies came. They appeared suddenly one sweltering afternoon. Dozens, then hundreds of fat black bodies buzzing against windows, collecting in dark clusters around the edges of 213's doorframe. They crawled along the baseboards in a living carpet, their wings beating a constant droning hum. That was when Carl finally called the police. Officers Daniel Martinez and Luis Ruiz responded to the complaint just past noon on October 17th. The autumn heat had turned the building's hallways into convection ovens, amplifying the stench until it hit them like a physical blow the moment the elevator doors opened on the second floor. Martinez, a rookie barely 6 months out of the academy, gagged audibly. Ruiz, a grizzled veteran with 20 years on the force, felt his stomach clench in primal. Warning. They knocked first, 3 sharp raps that echoed down the silent hallway. When no answer came, Ruiz tried the knob. Locked at a glance at Carl received a shrug and a jangle of master keys. The door swung inward with a groan of protesting hinges, releasing a gust of air so thick with decay that Martinez stumbled back, coughing. The apartment beyond was a study in contrasts, meticulously ordered yet profoundly wrong. Heavy blackout curtains blocked all sunlight, leaving the officers to navigate by the beams of their flashlights. Dust motes swirled in the intersecting cones of light, revealing a space frozen in time. A thin layer of grime coated every surface. Yet there were no cobwebs, no signs of insects beyond the swarm at the entrance. The air hung heavy with a mingled sense of formaldehyde, old blood, and something sweetly chemical that burned at the back of the throat. Ruiz's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating glass jars arranged with military precision along built-in shelves. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each filled with amber liquid that glowed faintly in the artificial light. At first glance, they might have contained biological specimens, the kind found in high school science labs. Then the beam caught the contents clearly, and Martinez's strangled gasp echoed through the apartment. Fingers floated in one jar, severed neatly at the knuckles, their nails still painted in chipped red polish. Another held a tongue, the muscle, darkened to purple, its taste buds visibly swollen. Ears, some with earrings still dangling, drifted like macabre jellyfish in their formaldehyde oceans. Eyeballs, their irises shockingly vivid in death, stared blankly from another container. The collection spanned multiple shelves, organized by type in a grotesque parody of a natural history exhibit. The kitchen revealed more horrors. The counters were spotless, but for one area that looked like a surgeon's workstation, stainless steel tools arranged in neat rows, their edges gleaming despite the dust. Bone saws, rib spreaders, and dental picks lay beside more mundane kitchen knives, all bearing the same dark stains in their crevices. The sink held a single drinking glass, its rim smeared with something that might have been lipstick. The refrigerator, when Ruiz forced himself to open it, contained only rows of plastic-wrapped packages, their contents mercifully obscured by frost. But it was the living room that stopped both officers in there. Tracks, dolls, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, arranged in precise formations throughout the space. Porcelain faces gleamed in the flashlight beams, their glass eyes reflecting the light in tiny, knowing pinpricks. Some were antique collectibles, their delicate features cracked with age. Others were cheap plastic toys, their molded smiles frozen in eternal cheer. They sat on shelves, perched on chairs, even stood at attention on the floor, all positioned to face the room's center like subjects awaiting their monarch's address. At the heart of this silent congregation stood an armchair, its floral upholstery worn shiny in places, stained dark in others. At a side table held a single lamp, its shade tilted at an odd angle. Ruiz approached slowly, his light revealing a stack of notebooks on the table's lower shelf. The top one lay open, its pages filled with cramped, spidery handwriting. The words seemed to crawl across the paper. They speak to me in the quiet hours, the dolls, I mean, not the others. The others only scream. But the dolls, they understand. The dark-haired one from Tuesday needs more work. Her mouth isn't right. I'll try again tonight. The jars are nearly full. Soon I'll need more. Ruiz turned the page with a gloved hand, and a Polaroid slipped free, fluttering to the floor face up. The image showed a young woman, early 20s maybe, her lips sewn shut with thick black thread. Her eyes were wide with terror, but what made Ruiz's breath catch was the realization that the photo had been taken while she was still alive. The timestamp in the corner read September 14th, 93. Just 1 month prior, a sound from the bedroom hallway snapped both officers to attention. A soft, wet click, like a dislocating jaw. Their lights converged on the darkness beyond, revealing nothing but more dolls lining the hallway. Their heads all turned toward the bedroom door at the end. Martinez's radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Backup was 5 minutes out. Crime scene techs were on their way, neither. Officer moved. The air had grown heavier somehow, pressing against their skin like a physical presence. Then came the giggled, high-pitched, and girlish. It echoed through the apartment with impossible clarity. Martinez's flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam illuminating the dolls at their feet, their painted smiles seeming to widen in the bouncing light. Ruiz grabbed his partner's arm and pulled him toward the door. They nearly knocked over Carl in their haste, the superintendent's face draining of color as he took in their expressions. "Seal it," Ruiz gasped. "Don't let anyone in until homicide gets here." As they waited in the comparatively fresh air of the hallway, Ruiz realized with dawning horror that the dolls hadn't just been facing the armchair. They'd been facing the door, watching, waiting for them. The crime scene investigation that followed uncovered horrors beyond imagining. The refrigerator's packages contained carefully labeled body parts. The bedroom closet held 7 human heads in various states of preservation. But most disturbing of all was the doll found sitting in the armchair. A life-size figure with real human hair and glass eyes that matched the description of a missing UCLA student for 1991. Forensic analysis would later determine that portions of its face had been crafted from actual human skin. The tenant of Unit 213 was never found. His rent continued to be paid anonymously until the building was condemned in 1995. When demolition crews finally tore the structure down, workers reported an unusual number of dolls in the rubble, all facing the wrecking ball as it swung toward them. As for the jars and their grisly contents, they vanished from police evidence 3 days after being cataloged. The security footage from that night shows only static between the hours of 3 o'clock and 3:33 a.m. But if you listen closely to the white noise on the tape, you can just make out the sound of something giggling. Kendra Webdale had always been careful about locking her door. She lived alone in a modest 1-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. A 5th-floor walk-up with creaky hardwood floors and windows that rattled when the subway passed beneath the building. The IT wasn't much, but it was hers, a safe haven after long days working as a receptionist at a midtown publishing house. She kept her space tidy, her groceries organized, her mail neatly stacked on the kitchen counter. The only thing that ever unsettled her was the man across the hall. Andrew lived in 5C. Kendra first noticed him in early November, Just after she'd moved in, she'd been struggling with a heavy grocery bag when her key slipped from her fingers. As she bent to pick it up, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. The door across the hall stood slightly ajar, a pale face peering through the gap. The door snapped shut before she could smile or say hello. At first, she thought nothing of it. New York was full of odd characters, and a shy neighbor barely registered. But then the sightings became more frequent. She'd find him loitering near the mailboxes when she checked after work. She'd catch glimpses of him through the peephole when she came home late, just standing in the hallway, perfectly still. Once, while taking out her trash, she turned to find him barely 3 feet behind her, his breath quick and shallow, his eyes fixed on the back of her neck. "Andrew," she said, forcing a polite tone despite the sudden chill down her spine. "Do you need something?" He blinked rapidly, his fingers twitching at his sides. "You left your keys in the door last Tuesday," he said. "I watched them for 2 hours until you came back." The admission hung between them, too strange to acknowledge. Kendra murmured thanks and hurried back to her apartment, making sure to deadbolt the door behind her. That night, she bought a chain lock from the hardware store down the block. The note started in December. Slips of paper would appear under her door while she was at work. Rambling, disjointed paragraphs written in cramped, frantic handwriting. Some described her daily routine in unsettling detail. Others contained paranoid rants about voices in the walls, about government surveillance, about how Kendra was one of them. She brought them to the building's superintendent, who sighed and said Andrew had been harmless for years, just a little off since his last hospitalization. "He takes his meds most days," the super said, shrugging. "Just throw them out." But Kendra couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She started noticing small disturbances when she came home. A dish slightly out of place, a drawer not fully closed, the faint scent of cigarette smoke in her bathroom, despite neither she nor her friend smoking. She installed a security camera aimed at her door, but the footage never showed anything unusual, just empty hallways and, occasionally, Andrew pacing past her threshold at odd hours, his lips moving silently. On January 3 RD, the temperature dropped below freezing. Kendra came home late from friend's birthday dinner, her breath visible in the unheated stairwell as she climbed to the 5th floor. She was fumbling with her keys when she heard it, a wet, rhythmic sound from the far end of the hallway. Andrew stood outside his door, rocking slightly on his heels. He was holding a knife. Not a kitchen knife, but something heavier, a hunting blade with a serrated edge that caught the dim hallway light as he turned it over in his hands. His lips were moving rapidly, as if rehearsing some silent speech. When he noticed Kendra, his entire body went rigid. "You're late," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I've been waiting since 7. Kendra's fingers tightened around her keys. Every instinct screamed to run, but the stairwell was behind him. Her apartment door might as well have been miles away. "Andrew," she said, keeping her tone even. "It's cold out here. Why don't you go inside?" He tilted his head, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "They told me you'd say that," he murmured. "Through the vents. All night, they've been talking about you." A floorboard creaked overhead, another tenant coming home. The sound seemed to startle Andrew. He blinked rapidly, his grip on the knife loosening for just a second. Kendra seized a moment, sidestepping toward her door with her keys raised like a weapon. Later, the medical examiner would note that the first stab wound entered just below Kendra's left collarbone, angled upward toward her heart. The blade pierced her lung before Andrew withdrew it and struck again, 14 times in total, each thrust, accompanied by a whispered phrase the responding officers couldn't quite make out over the screams of the neighbor who found her. The security camera footage from that night was unusually glitchy, the timestamp flickering between 7:03 p.m. and 3:33 a.m. before cutting out entirely. What remained showed only brief flashes, Andrew pacing outside Kendra's door for hours, his head cocked as if listening to something. Kendra arriving alone, then static. When police searched Andrew's apartment, they found the walls covered in newspaper clippings about Kendra, local articles mentioning her volunteer work, her high school graduation announcement, Even a discarded coffee receipt with her name on it and a notebook by his bed contained hundreds of entries detailing her comings and goings, interspersed with increasingly erratic passages about voices in the pipes and faces in the walls. The final page held a single sentence, written over and over in shaking script. She was one of them, she was one of them, she was one of them at trial. Andrew claimed the building itself had told him to do it, that the vents whispered Kendra's secrets late at night, that the radiators throbbed with her heartbeat. The jury took less than 2 hours to find him not guilty by reason of insanity. Kendra's apartment sat empty for nearly a year before new tenants moved in. They lasted 6 weeks before, breaking their lease, complaining of odd noises in the walls, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. The super offered to repaint, but when he peeled back the wallpaper in the bedroom, he found something that made even him recoil. Dozens of small holes drilled into the drywall at eye level, each just wide enough to peer through, all facing Kendra's old apartment. The first death should have been warning enough. Unit 44 was a typical Soviet-era apartment in a crumbling Moscow high-rise, small, dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and pipes that groaned like dying animals whenever someone turned on the heat. The building had stood since the 1960s, its concrete facade stained black from decades of exhaust fumes. Its stairwells reeking of cabbage and stale tobacco. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, where neighbors nodded in passing but never asked names. When old Mrs. Petrovna failed to collect her pension check for 3 weeks straight, the building superintendent finally knocked on her door. The smell hit him first, thick and sweet, like overripe fruit left in the sun. When no one answered, he used his master key, the lock sticking as if reluctant to turn. The apartment was spotless, dishes neatly stacked in the drying rack, but a single teacup waiting on the coffee table. The only thing out of place was the bathroom door, which stood slightly ajar, a dark stain creeping across the linoleum from within. Mrs. Petrovna lay in the dry bathtub, her body mummified by the apartment's unnatural heat. Her skin had turned the color of old leather, stretched tight over protruding bones. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her hands clutching the sides of the tub as if she'd try to claw her way out. Most disturbing of all, her eyes were gone. Not rotted, not pecked out by insects, but carefully removed, the sockets hollow and clean. The police wrote it off as a tragic accident, an elderly woman dying alone, the heat speeding decomposition. They didn't question why the bathroom radiator was cold to the touch when the rest of the apartment sweltered. They didn't notice the faint scratches covering the inside of the tub, as if something had been trapped there with her. The apartment sat empty for 2 months before the next tenant moved in. Dmitry Volkov was a university student, newly arrived from Siberia, with little money and fewer options. He laughed when the super warned him about the apartment's history, joking that he'd take a ghost over his last roommates snoring any day. The first week passed without incident. The second week, he started complaining to friends about strange noises, a wet, slithering sound in the walls at night, like something dragging itself through the pipes on the morning of November 17th. Dmitry's girlfriend came by to check on him after he missed their date. She found the apartment door unlocked, the lights all burning despite the midday sun. Dmitry hung from the ceiling fan in the living room, his toes barely brushing the overturned chair beneath him. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, his lips peeled back from gritted teeth. His hands were clenched so tightly around the noose that the rope had cut deep into his palms, as if he'd changed his mind too late. The police found no suicide note. They did find something odd in the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was covered in faint fingerprints, all at chest level, as if someone much shorter than Dmitry had stood there watching him. When they dusted for prints, the powder revealed something else. Tiny, child-sized handprints overlapping the larger ones, layered like generations of ghosts. The building superintendent crossed himself when he saw them. He'd been working there 20 years, and in all that time, no child had ever lived in Unit 44. The apartment stood vacant through the winter, its door marked with a small cross, drawn in chalk by one of the cleaning women. Then spring came, and with it, Natalia Ivanova, a single mother fleeing an abusive husband. She arrived with only a suitcase and her 4-year-old daughter, Anya. The super tried to warn her, but Natalia just smiled tiredly and said ghosts were better company than the living men she'd known. For the first month, everything seemed fine. Then Anya started talking about her new friend. At first, it was innocent enough, an imaginary playmate named Misha who liked to hide in the closet. Then Anya began refusing to go near the bathroom, screaming that Misha didn't like the water. Natalia would wake to find her daughter standing at the foot of the bed in the dead of night, whispering conversations with the empty air. The final straw came when Anya drew a picture of preschool, a stick figure with too many fingers standing over a smaller figure in a bathtub. When the teacher asked who it was, Anya said simply, Misha's mommy. Natalia was making plans to move when the accident happened. She'd been washing dishes while Anya played in the living room. The scream came suddenly, not from Anya, but from the bathroom, a high-pitched wail that froze Natalia's blood. She ran to find the bathroom door locked, water seeping out from underneath. Anya was nowhere to be seen. The door wouldn't budge, wouldn't break, no matter how hard Natalia threw herself against it. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, a sound Natalia would hear in her nightmares for the rest of her life. The distinct, wet pop of a child's eye being plucked from its socket. When the super arrived with the police, they found Natalia catatonic on the hallway floor, her fingernails torn and bloody from scratching at the bathroom door. Inside, the room was dry. The tub was empty. Anya was gone. Only one clue remained. The bathroom mirror was fogged over, and written in the condensation, in a child's clumsy print, were the words, Misha says thank you for the eyes. The building was demolished in 1999. Workers reported hearing laughter from empty rooms as the wrecking ball struck. When they tore open the walls, they found something that made even the most hardened laborers cross themselves. Dozens of tiny handprints pressed into the concrete, all leading to a single, long-forgotten crawl space beneath Unit 44. Inside, wrapped in crumbling Soviet-era newspapers, was a small skeleton missing both eye sockets, and beside it, in a neat row, 3 pairs of perfectly preserved human eyes.